Good morning, folks. Hello again. So we've got our next two speakers lined up. I'll ask Rob Buck and Kurt Borzel to turn on their camera and mics. You can at least see their pretty faces here before they start going into their presentations. I'll give a bit of a background on both of our speakers today. Again, so I'd like to thank both Rob and Kurt for coming today. I know that they're busy guys too as well, so I appreciate it, and I can't wait to hear what they have to say about the new ACO system as well. So Rob is an engagement specialist with the Aboriginal Consultation Office. He's been working in the forestry field since the early 1990s, starting off fighting wildfires in Manitoba, then transitioning into forest health and forest surveys. He's worked for all three levels of government in some sort of forestry-related role. He completed his forestry degree in 2001 from the U of A. He's taught at post-secondary level courses in forest management, measurements, ecology, forest protection, and policy and legislation. He started with Indigenous relations in the summer of 2016 and is currently based in Calgary. In his spare time, he likes to cook and grow garlic. Currently has about 500 bulbs apparently planted for harvest this fall, as well has recently taken up mountain biking. So, and Kurt Borzel, he's a consultation advisor. Kurt has a lifelong love of the bush. Spent the last 30 years working in and supporting forestry. Kurt has worked in wildfire control, forest engineering, harvesting operations, compliance and enforcement with the BC Forest Service before joining Alberta's Sustainable Resource Development, now AAFRED, in 2004 to work in timber management and compliance and enforcement fields. Kurt joined Alberta SRD's newly created Consultation and Aboriginal Relations team in 2008 and has been in the Indigenous consultation field ever since. Rumors that he was raised by wolves have never been proven, but do go a long way in explaining his table manners. So thank you, Kurt and Rob. I will turn it over to you guys. So let me get your presentation up, and then I'll get my ugly mug off the screen here. There we go. Over to you, gents.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Hudson. So good morning. And I'd like to just say that, like Hudson said, that I am an engagement specialist with the ACO based out of Calgary. And my field is in forestry, specifically forest protection. And I've been with IR since 2016. And I was an instructor with both the programs at NAIT and Portage College. I'm also presenting this too with Kurt Borzel, who's a consultation advisor based out of Edmonton. And I just want to acknowledge that we are pleased to be delivering this presentation from both the traditional territories of Treaty 6 and 7. And I also would like to acknowledge the Métis people of Alberta, who also share a deep history with this land. Next slide, please. So today, Kurt and I will be presenting to you an introduction about the consultation process. What does consultation entail within Alberta? As well as we'll go through the procedural aspects of consultation. Next slide, please. All right, so we're just going to start with a little bit of a background here. So it's about strengthening relationships. So Alberta is committed to strengthening the relationships with First Nations through the continued recognition of the treaty relationship between First Nations and the Crown. Alberta's legal duty to consult and accommodate is grounded within the honor of the Crown. So Alberta will seek to reconcile First Nations constitutionally protected rights and other societal interests with a view to substantially address the adverse impacts on treaty rights and traditional uses through a meaningful consultation process. Additionally, the provincial government strives to ensure that First Nations have the chance to benefit from the economic development opportunities and enjoy Alberta's prosperity. Alberta consults with First Nations because we have the legal and constitutional duty to consult with First Nations, and there may be Crown decisions that could adversely impact the continuing exercise of constitutionally protected treaty rights. Alberta also consults with Métis settlements and credibly asserted Métis communities, as there may be impacts to a Métis settlement and a credibly asserted Métis community members harvesting and traditional use activities as well. Next slide, please. So what is consultation? Well, simply put, consultation is a process intended to understand and consider the potential adverse impacts of an anticipated Crown decision on a First Nations treaty rights and traditional uses and or a Métis settlement, credibly asserted Métis communities members harvesting and traditional use activities with a view to substantially address them. Next slide, please. So why does Alberta consult with Indigenous communities? Well, we have a legal and constitutional duty to consult with First Nations. It's a policy decision to consult with Métis settlements and credibly asserted Métis in the Métis policy. And again, where Crown decisions may adversely impact the continued exercise of constitutionally protected treaty rights in harvesting and traditional use activities. Next slide, please. So when does Alberta consult with Indigenous communities? Well, there are three things that we have to consider. One, Alberta has a real or constructive knowledge of a right. Two, Alberta is contemplating a decision related to land and natural resource management. And three, the decision to adversely impact the continuing exercise of a First Nations treaty right or traditional use and or a Métis settlement members or credibly asserted Métis community members harvesting or traditional use activities. Next slide, please. So where is this process captured? Well, we've got several documents, policy and guidelines on consultation, as well as the proponent guide. And I'll also be kind of speaking about some of the initiatives here later on in the presentation about what we're doing. And the minister addressed this as well too, the creation of an Indigenous consultation guide as well too. Okay, next slide. So now we're just going to start going into the role in here. But first, I want to kind of differentiate the difference between a decision versus a recommendation. So for Alberta Energy regulated projects, so i.e. oil and gas and coal, the ACO makes decisions on consultation related to these upstream activities. A recommendation is with Alberta government ministries. So the ACO will make a recommendation on consultation for ministries such as parks, transportation, municipal affairs, and agriculture, forestry, and rural economic development. Next slide, please. So the duty to consult rests with the Crown. However, case law does allow the Crown to delegate procedural aspects of consultation to proponents. And these things include a plain language project information package, identifying potential project impacts, meeting with a First Nation, Métis settlement, credibly asserted Métis community to discuss concerns, developing potential mitigation strategies, implementing mitigation measures, and summarizing consultation efforts. The Crown delegates procedural aspects of consultation to the proponents. Oh, sorry. Next slide, please. Now, as I mentioned, it says that we do provide a recommendation to Alberta government ministries. So in this example here with agriculture, forestry, and rural economic development, AFRED is the regulator. Therefore, the consultation adequacy decision maker and final decision on the duty to consult and consultation is with this ministry. Because that the ACO is the subject matter expert in consultation, forestry refers forestry plans, so such as FMAs, FMPs, GDPs, to the ACO and receives support and advice from the ACO. Then forestry will use this information that they get from the ACO in the adequacy decision to inform the plan approval decision. All right, next slide, and Kurt will take over from here.
Thanks, Rob. Next slide, please. This is a very simplified map showing the process map, thank you, showing the process that consultation follows in Alberta. It's intended to be a high-level overview. We don't go into a lot of detail with this particular presentation. I know there's a lot of detail, a lot of nuances to consultation and the actual practical application of it. But for today's presentation, we're just going to do a high-level walkthrough. I don't know if your screen can show it very well, but it's broken up into three major chunks of work. You can see on the left-hand side the pre-consultation assessment, chunk of work. And then the middle, information sharing and exploring concerns, which is the delegated procedural aspects of consultation. And then the last part is verifying the record of consultation and adequacy assessment. Next slide, please. We're going to be looking at each of these phases in turn, and so we're just zooming in now on the first phase. You could see with the first phase for the pre-consultation assessment, AFRED receives the project plan and request from the project proponent, the forestry company, and sends it to the ACO for a pre-consultation assessment review, and gets advice from the ACO to make a decision on whether or not the duty to consult is triggered, at what level, and with which communities. They then provide direction to the project proponent to actually do the consultation conversation. Next slide, please. The pre-consultation assessment process applies for any land and natural resource development activities or projects that may impact treaty rights and traditional uses, and or Métis settlement or credibly asserted Métis community harvesting and traditional use activities. It starts with the proponent sending their forestry plan or activity to AFRED and requesting a pre-consultation assessment. The pre-consultation assessment determines whether consultation is required, which First Nation, Métis settlement, or credibly asserted Métis communities are to be consulted, and assessing the potential adverse impacts of a proposed activity or project. We also assess the scope of the duty to consult based upon the available information about the project's adverse impacts, and we assign a level of consultation in order to provide direction on the depth of consultation. You can see it's level 1 streamlined, level 2 standard, or level 3 extensive. It may also be already deemed adequate if consultation was done in the past on this project, or no consultation required may occasionally be chosen if there are no adverse impacts to treaty rights, traditional uses, or Métis settlement or credibly asserted Métis communities harvesting and traditional use activities. After receiving advice from the ACO, AFRED then provides direction to the proponent on which First Nations, Métis settlements, or credibly asserted Métis communities to consult and what level of consultation is required. The ACO uses several different tools to help us determine if consultation is required, in addition to the policy and guidelines, such as consultation areas of interest for the communities, traditional ecological knowledge information, past consultation with Indigenous communities in the area, the project footprint details, and Alberta and AER subject matter experts, such as fish and wildlife, forestry, and lands, who may have additional local knowledge. It's worth noting, if an HRV4C site, for cultural site is what the C stands for, is present during the pre-consultation stage, the proponent will be directed to contact Alberta Culture. Next slide, please. This is a quick overview of the process for level 1 consultation, the streamlined level. Sorry, catching up with my notes here. Please note the timelines. It starts with project notification on the left, which is sending the information package to the communities. The notification period is typically, for level 1, it's 15 Government of Alberta working days. And this is the period in which the Indigenous communities may respond to the project. If they respond, they move on to the exploring concerns phase. This is the proponent-led consultation with the Indigenous communities in which they're seeking any specific concerns on how the project may adversely impact rights and uses. And it generally takes, for level 1, it generally takes about 15 days. That's not a target to be met. It's just a general capture of how often it takes on average, how long it takes on average. When the exploring concerns phase is complete, we move on to the record of consultation log, colloquially known as ROC log notification. And that's where the proponent sends the ROC log to the First Nation or Métis settlement or CAMC, credibly asserted Métis community, to obtain verification. And they must send it by verified delivery method. This is the period of time where the Indigenous community has the opportunity to review the ROC log to make sure that it's complete and accurate. This ROC log review period is 5 GOA working days for level 1. And then it moves on to the ACO adequacy assessment. If the Indigenous communities don't have any concerns with the completeness or the accuracy of the ROC log, it then is submitted to the Government of Alberta to do an adequacy assessment. And that we're given 10 GOA working days to complete that. And next slide, please. Same process, but at level 2, it's a little bit more time. So the project notification, again, sending the information package, the proponent sends the information package to the community. The notification period, they have 15 GOA working days, and we recommend that 2 follow-ups be done, or two follow-ups are required. I shouldn't say recommend, they are required by the proponent. One typically at day 5, the second typically at day 10. And this is only because we're recording these 2 notifications only because level 2 consultation is associated with higher risk, or slightly higher risk of the project. Exploring concerns phase generally takes about 20 days. It may take longer. It's worth noting here, for all of these exploring concerns phases, the timelines for completing the consultation process will be driven by the particular circumstances arising within each case. While consultation should generally be completed within the timelines noted, there may be cases where further time is required to complete a reasonable consultation process. So please don't look at the exploring concerns timeline as a target to be met. Think of it as an average. Followed by the rock log notification, same as before. Again, as with level 1, the Indigenous communities will have 5 working days, 5 GOA working days to review the rock logs for completeness and accuracy. And then, as with level 1, the ACO adequacy assessment, the government of Alberta has 10 GOA working days to complete the adequacy assessment. Again, this 10 GOA working days involves the AFRID, the forestry staff, the area forester, sending it to their consultation advisor to get advice back, and then they can make their decision from there. Next slide, please. Level 3, extensive consultation. This is where we start to make a big difference in the timeline for consultation. Project notification, same as before. The proponent sends the information package to the communities. The notification period is now 20 working days, 20 GOA working days for the Indigenous community to respond to the project. And we recommend first follow-up at day 10, and then a second follow-up at day 15. Exploring concerns phase, our guiding documents, the guidelines, and the proponent guide say that generally 60 days is required for, or is involved in exploring concerns. But we've often found with level 3 consultation, it takes far beyond 60 days for level 3 consultation. At the completion of consultation, when the proponent believes the consultation is complete, they again then send the rock log to the Indigenous communities for them to review for completeness and accuracy. You'll note here, because of level 3, now the Indigenous communities have 10 GOA working days to review this, just because it's a larger project, greater complexity of project, and typically there's far greater, the size of the records to review is much larger because of a longer consultation period. And then following that, for the ACO adequacy assessment, we have 20 GOA working days, again, for the same rationale, because it takes more time to review more complex records and longer records. Next slide, please. Information sharing and exploring concerns. This is the middle part of the consultation process. The proponent sends a notification package to the First Nation, Métis Settlement, or credibly asserted Métis community, and they engage in consultation. If the community responds to the project, they engage in consultation, asking for site-specific concerns and addressing them in a reasonably responsive manner. Next slide, please. This is relatively new information for some people, but we've been using this for some time. What is a site-specific concern? A site-specific concern is directly tied to a treaty right, harvesting, or traditional use as defined in the applicable consultation policy. It can be spatially defined. It is identified as adversely impacted by the proposed project, and it may be avoided or mitigated by the proponent. These are the criteria that we use to determine what a site-specific concern is, versus a broad concern. Broad concerns, on the other hand, are not site-specific concerns relating to the proposed project. They're typically concerns, and there's 3 examples there that we have: their wildlife population, water quality, cumulative effects. There's a much, much longer list that we have internally that we keep, that we pay attention to, what constitutes various examples. But this is just to for icons for you to take a peek at. Next slide, please. The proponent must capture all concerns expressed in a record of consultation log and the Consultation Concern Response Table. We refer to them colloquially as CCRTs. If there are questions regarding concerns that come up, when you saw in the previous slide about what constitutes a site-specific concern versus a broad concern, we have questions. Pardon me, let me back up for a second. If there's any confusion or lack of clarity regarding the kind of concern that a proponent receives from an Indigenous community, the onus is on the proponent to ask for clarity, to seek clarity from the Indigenous community so that they can clearly understand whether the concern is site-specific or broad. To this end, we have 5 questions that we've provided in the proponent guide that proponents can use to unpack or explore these concerns. First one is, what specifically is the concern? Second one is, where specifically is the concern located in relation to the proposed project footprint? Thirdly, how are the treaty rights or traditional uses or harvesting or traditional use activities impacted by the proposed project? And then what's the significance of the concern? And then lastly, are there any suggested actions from the Indigenous community to effectively mitigate the concern? We encourage proponents to ask these questions when there's any concerns regarding whether or not they understand what they're being advised of by the community. And efforts to avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts could include modifying the project design, modifying the project footprint, modifying the project timing, and exploring options to address concerns regarding access. Last point on this slide, proponents should give Indigenous communities the opportunity to comment on proposed accommodation measures prior to submitting for adequacy assessment. So in your CCRT, if you capture a concern, Consultation Concern Response Table, if you capture a concern from a First Nation, preferably verbatim, and then you provide measures that you're going to do to address the concern, to respond to the concern, the Indigenous community should have the opportunity to see what your proposed measures are before you submit to AFRID or to the ACO for an adequacy assessment. Next slide, please. Occasionally, Indigenous communities may provide a letter of non-objection. The First Nation, Métis Settlement, or credibly asserted Métis community may provide a letter to the proponent indicating they have no objection with the project. And consultation is considered by the ACO is considered to be concluded when there is a valid letter of non-objection. So there's no need for a review of the rock log for errors or omissions because they've said they have no objections to the project moving forward. A letter of non-objection, for it to be valid, must contain the following information: the file number for consultation, which is the FNC number, the company or proponent name, the project name and or legal land location, and confirmation that there are no objections with the project proceeding forward in the regulatory process. This is so that we can verify that the letter of non-objection is tied to your company for this particular project that you're consulting on. Next slide, please. We move on to the final phase of consultation, which is where the rock log is sent to forestry, call it AFRID for now, for an adequacy assessment. AFRID then sends it to the ACO for a review and recommendations or advice regarding adequacy. A discussion typically happens between the consultation advisor and the area forester, and then a memo is sent from the ACO, from the consultation advisor, to the area forester with a recommendation consultation is not yet complete or it is complete and adequate. AFRID then makes the final decision on adequacy. As Rob mentioned before, AFRID is a government ministry. They represent the Crown. They are the Crown, and therefore they make the decision on adequacy. And then that adequacy decision then informs their regulatory approval decision. We recommend for proponents to refer to the ACO webpage for rock log templates and updates. Proponents are to reply to all communications received from the First Nation, Métis Settlement, or credibly asserted Métis community involved in all consultation and include those details in their rock log. Please include details for both successful and unsuccessful consultation communications, like leaving a phone call, leaving a voicemail message if you couldn't connect, that kind of thing. The CCRT is intended to be a cumulative listing of all concerns raised during consultation, and it's used in conjunction with the rock log. The rock log, think of the rock log as the capture of the process of consultation. who connected with who said what, that kind of thing. It determines procedural completeness, the record of it. The CCRT is more focused on the substantive aspect of consultation, or any concerns raised, and if any were raised, were they responded to in a reasonably responsive manner to the concern expressed. This is where we speak to adequacy. The final version of the CCRT must be sent with the final rock log to the Indigenous community, to each Indigenous community. The CCRT template can be found on the Indigenous Consultation in Alberta webpage. We have an external webpage. You can find a template for that document. If in doubt, contact your consultation advisor. The proponents will maintain a CCRT for each Indigenous community that they're consulting. And once consultation is concluded, the final rock log and CCRT are sent to the Indigenous community for review for errors and omissions. If errors and omissions exist, the proponent will make the required changes to the rock log and CCRT and resend them for review again. And the proponent is expected to work together with the Indigenous community to resolve inaccuracies. Sometimes they're minor inaccuracies like a misspelling of a name or a date or something like that, and sometimes they're substantive where a concern was not captured. Next slide, please. Speaking to the adequacy decision, you get a simple yes or no answer. If it's yes, that means that consultation is procedurally complete and or substantively adequate, and or meaning it can be procedurally complete, but if there were no concerns raised and there's no substantive aspect to consultation, procedurally complete would then be adequate. The project can then move on to the regulatory decision stage. But it can also be no, consultation is not yet adequate. And it could be because it's procedurally incomplete or concerns were not addressed adequately. The rock log and or the CCRT may not adequately document consultation. It might be an incomplete or inaccurate record and needs to be updated or corrected. And the proponent will ensure that concerns are addressed and the rock log is resubmitted. Next slide, please. Back to you, Rob.
All right, thank you, Kurt. Next slide, please. So just going to finish off the presentation here talking about some best practices and some initiatives that the ACO is currently involved with. So with some of the best practices, so, one of the things is start the consultation process early, plan for potential issues and timelines extending beyond the minimums. Create a plain language material and maps that should be able to be understood by regular folks with no knowledge of forestry, clear, concise, and obvious. If suggested meeting dates set by the Indigenous community are unreasonable, suggest alternatives or negotiate a date. Give reasonable deadlines when first and second attempts are made to consult with the Indigenous community. Consultation is based on the honor of the Crown, so we must be reasonable. Follow through on commitments, so meetings, information sharing, etc., before submitting your rock logs. Or otherwise document any agreement with the Indigenous community to demonstrate how the concerns will be addressed post-approval, but pre-disturbance, harvesting, road building, etc. Don't overlap or lump forestry plans together for consultation. One consultation project for each plan, because each plan has its own regulatory approval decision. If a meeting date is set to discuss the plan, the proponent can't submit the rock log before the meeting takes place and the information included in the rock log. If the meeting is canceled, a reasonable effort should be made to reschedule before submitting the rock logs. This usually means at least one more follow-up with the meeting dates that you're prepared to meet and a deadline by which time, if the First Nation Métis settlement or credibly asserted Métis community has not met, you will submit the rock logs. Submitting the rock log and the final CCRT for review, to the First Nation Métis settlement or credibly asserted Métis community is a signal that the proponent believes that consultation is complete. Ensure you're engaging with the current First Nation Métis settlement credibly asserted consultation contacts as listed on the IR's website. And lastly, if the proponent would like Indigenous ACO staff to attend meetings with a First Nation Métis settlement or credibly asserted Métis community, ACO staff are able to provide this support. Okay, next slide, please. Now, a few of the initiatives that the ACO has done over the past couple of years, and that it says that we do have something what we call the ACO Bulletin. And so this is a quarterly newsletter that talks about, about initiatives or kind of consultation, things about consultation that we do provide to, to the proponents, government staff, and that. And this is something that that is available on the Indigenous Relations website, and you can actually sign up to have this emailed to you. Another thing that we are currently working on and is going live is the ACO Digital Service. This is kind of like a thing to replace some of the consultation efforts and that, and to kind of help with the management of the consultation process in Alberta. We are also right now in the development of a Indigenous Communities Consultation Guide, as well as a number of training and outreach opportunities. So for example, we've provided these presentations to over 600 individuals on various topics of the role of the ACO, the relationship between the ACO and the regulators, why consultation is required, talking about about the consultation process in Alberta, as well as providing advice through through these presentations. And these outreach opportunities like the one that we are presenting with today. As well as providing some presentations to post-secondary institutes. And with that, next slide, please. So these are some of the documents that are available on the Indigenous Relations website. It's on the Open Alberta website. And with that, I would like to thank you for listening to Kurt and I present today. And if you do have any questions, we are happy to entertain them. Our contact information is also listed here within this slide.
Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Rob. Just so everyone's aware, all the presentations today are being recorded, and they'll be made available to conference attendees here at a later date once we get them all kind of loaded and put up onto the website, so to speak. So the presentations and the information that you've seen here today, you should be able to get, at that point in time as well, if you want to go back and look at any specific slides or what have you. So we're a bit ahead of schedule. This stage, we usually open it up for the Q&A session. I'm looking at the chat Q&A. We've got one question in there from Aaron Jones. Not sure if Rob or Kurt can see that, but I'll read it out. So how does the ACO ensure there are consistent decisions made about submission requirements and adequacy decisions across the different regions of the province? Because it doesn't always the case, it says. One of you gents want to take that on?
Sure, we can take that one. Thanks, Aaron, for that question. As Aaron, as you know, consistency is a target that we're aiming for. We don't always achieve 100% consistency. We do have the standards laid out within the policy, the guidelines, and the proponent guide for consultation. So regarding what documentation is required and what is to be supplied to the Indigenous communities, and then again to the Crown for an adequacy decision, that's the measure for achieving consistency. Also recognizing that different regions, different forest areas operate in slightly different ways, we account for that as well. So you're aiming for consistency while not sacrificing flexibility and reasonableness in the process. I know that's a very high level answer to your question, but Aaron, feel free to contact me later if you want to have a much deeper conversation on that question.
Perfect, thanks. We got one more here from Chris Valaire. Consultation deadlines always comes up with Indigenous organizations, considering they are also reviewing oil and gas, mining applications, etc. Any comments on this?
I'm not sure I understand the concept of consultation deadlines. That might be referring to, Chris, are you referring to timelines for consultation?
GDP, etc. Chris has said in his response. So I'm assuming he's referring to some of the review timelines that you'd mentioned and what the potential impacts are or consideration should be taken into account if they're also looking at a mountain of other things. Right.
Right. Yeah. Deadlines could also be referring to regulatory approval requirements. They need their GDP to be approved by X date. So I'm not entirely certain how to answer the question. We provided some information on consultation timelines throughout the presentation. The timelines are there to be able to provide some measure of regulatory certainty while still reflecting the Crown's need to be reasonable in executing the duty to consult. We can't be hard and fast on timelines. We have to be reasonable. That's the standard to be met. And so the timeframes that we provide they're not even targets to be met. They're recognitions of what a file typically takes for level 1, 2, and 3. But please allow for extra time on an individual case-by-case basis.
Perfect. And then Chris, obviously you can give Kurt and Rob a shout, as they've indicated, if you got additional questions you want to follow up with them on. And Paul Hewitt has got a question up here. Can you elaborate on how broad concerns are reviewed? The right for quiet and peaceful enjoyment of cabins would be an example. Usually the buffers requested are too large to be reasonable.
I'm sorry,
Kurt and Rob, if you want. Oh, no worries. Kurt and Rob, if you go to the chat window and you click on Q&A, you'll see the questions. I'm kind of reading them, but I can repeat this one from Paul Hewitt. It was, can you elaborate on how broad concerns are reviewed? The right for quiet and peaceful enjoyment of cabins would be an example. Usually the buffers requested are too large to be reasonable.
Okay. All concerns have to be captured, obviously, and all concerns have to be addressed in a reasonably responsive manner. A reasonably responsive manner to the concern expressed is what drives the adequacy decision. So if a concern that you're getting seems to be unreasonable from the project proponent's perspective, then it would require the project proponent to engage with the community that provided that concern to unpack that concern. Not just, okay, you want, X buffer, 400 meters, 800 meter buffer, but why? What's important? What values are you trying to protect? What's important to the community that needs to be protected? That deeper level of understanding allows for a far greater measure of reasonableness in addressing the concern, which of course makes a much more reasonable and defensible decision on adequacy down the line. So my default answer to that, generally with a broad concern, is make sure that your answers are, or your responses to the concerns are reasonably responsive to the concern expressed. If the concern expressed is very vaguely worded or very generally worded, then unpack that with the community as much as you can to have a much more specific and clear understanding of what they're trying to convey. Or failing that, if they don't provide anything further, because that occasionally happens, then your response to the concern must be reasonable to the concern as it was expressed. So of a necessity, you may not be able to be highly detailed in your measures to address a concern that was provided to you very, very generally. Or perhaps you might, if you have the opportunity to unpack that concern.
So we can see if we've got another one.
Hello, Hudson.
Yep.
Oh, Todd Bailey here. Yeah, can I ask a question through here,
Sure.
or do I have to go through the Q&A?
Nope, here's fine. Yeah, you can type or through here as well. You got the ability to as a presenter, so yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, just a couple questions, I guess. One is the Indigenous consultation guide. If you go back a slide or two on, just wondering. Oh, back. No, go forward there a couple. Yeah, the Indigenous Communities Consultation Guide, is that being developed with the First Nations, or is that something internal with ACO? And then I actually have another, just a question, and I'm not sure if you be able to answer or not, but part of and through ACO and say, for example, the Treaty 8 on the website, you have the Treaty 8 consultation contacts, right? And it outlines how nations just preferred methods of the initial consultation and the contacts. And so Swan River actually had requested to put a link on there to our Swan River's consultation policy, because we recognize Alberta has one, which is not Swan River, then it's not even remotely close to Swan River's consultation policy. So we thought it would be useful to actually, in addition to have the contact information there and the method of information exchange with plan submissions from proponents, to also have the link to our website that has our consultation policy on there, just so that when proponents wish to consult or actually have to consult with Swan River, that they're actually coming properly prepared. And for some reason, I don't think that was well received from ACO to include that link. So I'm just wondering if there was any, just to better understand why, because I think from the nation's perspective, that would actually help out the consultation process, both for Alberta, Swan River, and the proponents. And and just, I guess, one comment here on the reasonableness of the buffers, so broad concerns and the buffers with cabins and stuff like that and quiet enjoyment. I think that would involve and I agree 100%, Kurt, with drilling into more, communicating and engaging more with the community on that, because there's a connectivity on the land. There's cabins are, it kind of get focused on site specific. So it's a cabin and then throw a buffer, and what's reasonable to a forest company or to Alberta is not likely the same to what a First Nation member would have. And traveling to the cabin and all the land uses and the values of traveling out to access a particular area and the space in between the sites are equally important. So that's a way deeper conversation that the nation, the First Nations people would have to have with the proponent to be able to come up with what buffers and mitigation strategies that would still be able to protect the right or the use of a particular area. It's not sites. I'm going to cut it off there. But anyways, there's a couple comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd. Sounds like there's a couple questions there. One in relation to additional information on the Indigenous Communities Consultation Guide, as far as how it's being developed and involvement from the Indigenous communities. And the second was some additional information in relation to a couple other aspects of their presentation. So, Kurt, Rob, I'll turn over to you to kind of respond.
I can speak to at least one of them, Rob. Okay. Regarding the First Nation and Métis settlement or the Indigenous Communities Consultation Guide. It's still being worked on at this point in time, Todd. Thanks for that question. It was the whole project, the whole initiative got started because we were hearing from Indigenous communities that they would like to have a guide. They read the proponent guide and saw that it was specifically focused on, targeted at, if you will, the target audience being industrial proponents. And they wanted to have a guide that would be more focused from an Indigenous perspective to help them to maximize their effectiveness in consultation, engaging in consultation. So the ACO heard that, and we took that initiative to leadership and said, yeah, let's do this. So regarding the development of this draft guide, we engaged with communities and invited, actually all of them, invited them to engage with us and talk with us about what they would like to see in the guide. Quite a few of them did engage with us. Not all of them accepted the invitation to. But the communities that we met with, we interviewed and we had good discussions. We heard a lot of really good feedback, and we took that feedback and used that to inform the guide. The guide is not yet done. I understand it will be done sometime before summer, I think, maybe. Don't put me down as promising that. I don't know. I'm not privy to that final decision-making date that may or may not exist at this point. But that, I hope that addresses, where did this guide come from and were Indigenous communities involved? Todd, the answer is yes. Regarding the consultation contact information, the ACO doesn't manage that web page. But Todd, maybe could you get a hold of me maybe after the session or send me an email, and I can get you through to the staff member who manages that page of the consultation contacts for the Indigenous communities. I don't know the rationale why that was not included. I can't speak to that, but perhaps that person can speak with you about that.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. We've got another question here from Gordon Whitmore. For level 3 consultation, multiple submissions of the ROC log are provided during the process. What is the standard approach in the process, by stage, by monthly, agreed upon steps, etc.?
Presently, it's bi-monthly. We find that I've done in the past myself. I've worked on level 3 consultations for forest management plans, where it was looked at once a year by stage, if you will, and we found that it was a lot more difficult to wade through a much thicker document or much longer document, but it was also much more difficult to provide timely guidance to the project proponent based upon a year's worth of consultation at a time. We found it challenging. So the ACO made a strong recommendation that we should go with bi-monthly reports to the Indigenous communities and to the government of Alberta, because that way we can see a shorter chunk of time. We could be much more effective in reviewing the information, and be much more effective in guiding the consultation and managing the consultation process by providing to project proponents timely guidance and direction.
Perfect. Thanks, Kurt. Next question is from, I apologize if I butcher the name, Sugo Thurazami. I think it is. And the question is essentially, the law is linked to mitigating risk to Indigenous members' rights. The policy and dialogue is often linked to Indigenous governments. What is the obligation of the Crown or proponents?
What is the obligation of proponents? Is that the question?
I guess in relation to that, yeah. The law is linked to mitigating risk to Indigenous members' rights. The policy and dialogue is often linked to Indigenous governments. What is the obligation of the Crown or proponents within that, I guess, if any? I'm assuming it would just be what you've gone through from the ACO requirements, right?
Yeah, the consultation process, the Indigenous consultation process in Alberta with First Nations, Métis settlements, incredibly assertive Métis communities, is based upon the Constitution and based upon case law. It's informed by case law. So the Alberta's current process reflects this. The role of project proponents is to represent their projects as delegated by the Crown. In this particular case, the Crown recognizes that it may not be in a good position to represent the project proponent mitigating certain concerns regarding their project. It's better represented by the project proponent themselves.
Perfect. Thanks, Kurt. I had a question, since we seem to be out of ones from the floor. It was in relation to the ACO digital service that's been mentioned here a couple of times. I know the minister alluded to it in his keynote about it replacing 3 systems with one and what have you. I'm kind of excited about it because I deal a lot with the ACO, obviously, in the work that I do for various, not only forestry, but oil and gas, mining, and what have you. So I'm more curious on a couple things. So one is this new ACO digital service up and running? And I guess the second question would be, can you give us any more details about, what systems has it replaced, or like, what is it improving, or like, what's the whizzy wowie, we should be awesomely excited about type thing?
I can answer that one. So yeah, so the digital service, has gone through some testing now, and it is, I do believe that it is available. Like if you want to email me, and that I can send you the contact information for the person in terms of the DS and that. So again, like I said, it's a new system, that is allowing kind of like the users to manage like their regulatory files, more effectively. And so for example, like the First Nations Métis consultation staff can access this information easily and more quickly. Check up the status or whatever of the files. Look up contacts, find out about how the consultation process is going in here. You can look at all your current and active consultations in one place. You can search by proponent name, project name, or any other information. And we're always taking feedback to kind of help improve this system and that. As well, as like the consultation staff, like from the government side, can take a look at, looking at the files as well too. So kind of some of the systems that it is replacing, like the big one is EDS. And I think that and Kurt, you'll have to kind of remind me about this, that I think that all new files are going through the DS now. So there's no, I don't think that there are still some files that are going through EDS and that, but anything new is coming through the digital service now.
Perfect.
Yeah,
That
Rob,
gives
my
me-
understanding is that the decision to have all new files come to the digital service is going to happen, I think, sometime in May. I'm not the product owner, and I'm by no means a technical expert by any stretch of the imagination. But having worked in the digital service and having been subject to or party to a couple of meetings, I think sometime in May, sometime in late May, I think. But don't quote me on that. I'm not the right person to answer that question.
No worries. That helps. Thanks, guys. Okay, I don't see any other questions. So again, we got a bit of time. So what we will do then is I will thank you guys for meeting with us here today and sharing your time and the information, your presentations. As I've said, folks, all the presentations have been recorded here today. They'll be made available on the website later on to anybody who's registered for this technical session. So don't worry if you missed something, you should be able to go back and get it if you need to. What we'll do now is I'm going to very shortly stop presenting, and then what we will do is I'll leave you guys to mill about and either network within the conference room, or if you're like me, multitasking on 5 other things, you can focus on another task for the next little bit. And the next session will start up as per the agenda at 11 a.m. So thanks again, Kurt and Rob, for your presentation today. I found it very informative. And yeah, if no other questions are coming up, we'll turn you loose, and we will see everyone back here again at 11 o'clock. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.